Hello YouTube! Spiderling has announced that the long-anticipated Besiege version 1.0 is about to be released. But in the meantime, enjoy a blast from the past, 2 Besiege version 0.01 skin packs. One is to emulate the aesthetic of Besiege version 0.01, and the other is to showcase a few hidden blocks I found. For this task, I found special software for discovering files and dealing with various file types, which I'll list below. At first, I expected this to be as simple as searching for each block's mesh and texture, ripping them, and calling it a day. But boy was I wrong. You might remember the Legacy skin pack that Spiderling uploaded a while back. Some of its models emulate revised versions of blocks, and others are surprisingly inaccurate. The first block I changed, and perhaps the most important, is the starting block. The Legacy skin pack starting block looks like a mirror reflection of the current one. That's because the Legacy skin pack simply uses the current starting block model, and the game mirrors some models when they're loaded in. I have no idea why it does that. To correct for this in Blender, you can scale the block by -1 on the x-axis, then flip the normals, which I had to do for several blocks. But for the starting block, I wanted to recover the classic version that was quite a bit different. My first major surprise was that the old starting block wasn't saved as one mesh. The green beveled cube is one mesh, and the black blocks running through it are other, separate meshes. First, I imported the black block into Blender, and copied and rotated it, making sure the faces are oriented the same way as in the original game. Then I imported the green cube. After that, I changed the UV map to get the metal pattern and the solid green color into one texture. The resulting starting block was way too big, so I reduced the size to 21%. I scaled the face's UV maps down to 99.7% to get rid of the slight color bleed. At this point, I was expecting my starting block to be just like the original, and it's not even close. It turns out that many of the game's assets are altered when they appear in the game. For example, compare the sheep sounds in the source files to the ones in the actual game. Apparently, the game runs the starting block's surface through a color filter. To get my model to match the original, I had to adjust the hue, saturation, and value. Using trial and error with 3 variables wasn't easy, but I think my efforts paid off with an authentic, vintage starting block. 1 block down, 30 to go. Another block that took some work was the flamethrower. The Legacy pack's flamethrower is accurate to the one that was used in most of the early game, but in version 0.01 only, the model was a little different. The barrel was under the nozzle, and there were other slight differences as well. The flamethrower barrel and nozzle were stored as separate meshes, and when I loaded them into Blender, the scale, angle, and position were all wrong. After fixing this, I did some rearranging in GIMP to get the nozzle and barrel textures into one image without losing resolution. Then I did some slight color correction on the dark part of the nozzle. For some reason, the nozzle isn't smooth like the old version, even though it's the same 3D model. If anyone knows a way to fix that, I'd like to update the skin. The Legacy skin pack does feature the original props from Besiege versions 0.01 to 0.03. However, their proportions are off, so I took them down to 60% of that thickness to correct for that. This is one of the blocks that gets mirrored about the x-axis, but since the new direction is aerodynamically correct, I left it alone. I also modified the model for the short props, so smaller aircraft can sport the vintage look too. You might have noticed that the angle of my model is still different from that of the original prop. I'll get to that later in the video. I edited a lot of the other blocks too, and I'll go through them quickly to get to the hidden blocks faster. For starters, there are a couple other blocks that were different in the very early game. And there are other blocks that the Legacy pack didn't get quite right. So those are the main blocks I edited for my version 0.01 skin pack. But while I was rummaging through game files, I found a few hidden blocks. So I made a second version 0.01 skin pack to include them. One hidden block is an alternate model for the flamethrower. You might recognize its dragon design. Although the crossbow wasn't added until Besiege version 0.42, there was a model for it in the game's code from the very beginning. When I first adapted the old crossbow model for the skin pack, it looked like this, with its texture weirdly mapping onto the arrow. But when the arrow was fired, it goes back to the normal coloration. In fact, the crossbows in all the skin packs are like this. Even if you use the default crossbow mesh and texture, the arrow gets miscolored, which is why the Legacy pack includes models of all the blocks, except the crossbow. Well, I'll spare you the gory details, but I did find a way to get the arrow to show up right. Perhaps the most interesting hidden block is the spike roller. To give you this block, I replaced the drill's 3D model. JCUDOS' Collider pack shows us that most of the drill's hitbox is actually even thickness. So with the right scaling, the spike roller model can be made to fit nicely. This second version 0.01 skin pack has another unique feature. The props angles are corrected to match those of the original game. The drawback is that they're not symmetrical when flipped, which is why I left the angle as is in the first skin. But with both skins, you have the option to have your classic props either way. So those are my two new skin packs, perfect for the Besiege hipster who wants to keep it vintage. As always, links are in the description. Have fun!